There is one question your soulmate never thought they would have to ask themselves again, yet recently it has become impossible to ignore. What if the biggest decision you ever made was never what it appeared to be? What if the moment they once believed pushed you away was actually the moment you were trying to protect something far more valuable than either of you understood at the time? Stay with me until the very end, because the story they have just uncovered is not the story they spent years believing. It began with a single realization that quietly challenged every conclusion they had ever reached about this connection. For so long, they looked back on your biggest decision through the lens of their own emotions. They believed they already knew why it happened. They convinced themselves they understood your intentions, your silence, and the distance that followed. But recently, a different perspective found its way into their heart, and suddenly the pieces they had carried for so many years no longer fit together the way they once did. Moments they had dismissed as simple choices now seemed filled with hidden meaning. Conversations they thought were ordinary suddenly sounded completely different in their memory. Even the silence that followed your decision no longer felt empty. Instead, it began telling a story they had never stopped long enough to hear. The more they reflected, the more one unsettling thought continued returning. What if they had misunderstood the most important chapter of this journey from the very beginning? That possibility stayed with them because every memory they revisited seemed to reveal another layer they had never noticed before. They remembered the hesitation in your words, the emotions you tried so hard to hide, and the strength it must have taken to make a choice that could easily be mistaken for something it was never meant to represent. Slowly, they realized they had focused on the outcome without ever asking what was happening inside your heart when that decision was made. And that changed everything. Instead of seeing your choice as the end of something meaningful, they began wondering whether it had actually been one of the hardest sacrifices you had ever carried in silence. Every forgotten detail started pointing toward a truth that had remained hidden beneath assumptions for years. They could no longer look at your decision as a single moment in time. They now saw it as the beginning of a story they had never truly understood. As that realization grew stronger, they felt something shift deep within them. The answers they had searched for were no longer leading them toward blame or regret. They were leading them toward understanding. And what they are about to discover next will reveal the real story behind your biggest decision, a story so unexpected that it has completely transformed the way they now see you. This connection and everything they once believed was true, and now, listen carefully, because this is the moment your soulmate stopped looking only at what happened and started searching for why it happened. For years, they believed your biggest decision could be explained by a single reason. They thought they had already figured it out. In their mind, they created a story that helped them make sense of everything. It wasn't a story they wanted to believe, but it was the only one that seemed to fit the silence that followed. They assumed they knew what you were thinking. They assumed they understood what motivated your choice. Yet as time passed, something unexpected began challenging those assumptions. The memories they once viewed with certainty started revealing details they had completely overlooked. They remembered moments when your words seemed unusually careful, as though you were carrying something too heavy to explain. They remembered expressions that now looked less like confidence and more like quiet hesitation. They remembered opportunities when you could have chosen the easier path but didn't. And suddenly, those moments no longer appeared random. Instead, they seemed connected by an invisible thread they had never noticed before. The more they reflected, the more they realized they had spent years judging your decision from the outside, while never considering what it may have felt like from within. That thought stayed with them because it changed the questions they were asking. Instead of wondering why you walked away, they began wondering what you were carrying when you made that choice. Instead of focusing on what they lost, they started thinking about what you may have sacrificed. It was an entirely different perspective, and it revealed an entirely different story. They slowly understood that not every difficult decision is made because someone stops caring. Sometimes the hardest choices are made precisely because someone cares more deeply than anyone realizes. That possibility unsettled them because it forced them to reconsider memories they believed had already been settled forever. As they continued looking back, they noticed how often your actions quietly contradicted the conclusions they had reached. There were moments when your concern still showed through small gestures. There were times when your silence seemed less like indifference and more like restraint. Even after your decision, there were subtle signs that suggested your heart had not become as distant as your circumstances had. Those details had always been there, but they had been overshadowed by disappointment and unanswered questions. Now, with a calmer heart and a wiser perspective, those same details began speaking louder than ever before. They started seeing your decision not as one isolated moment, but as the final chapter of a struggle that had been unfolding long before anyone recognized it. Every hesitation, every thoughtful pause, every difficult conversation suddenly became pieces of the same story. They realized your choice had likely been far more complicated than they had ever imagined. It may have required you to carry emotions you never expressed, fears you never revealed, and responsibilities you never placed on anyone else's shoulders. That understanding replaced certainty with humility. They no longer believed they knew the whole truth. Instead, they became willing to admit that there were parts of your journey they had never truly seen. And once they accepted that possibility, something remarkable happened. Their heart became more interested in understanding than in judging. The anger they once carried slowly gave way to curiosity. The confusion that had followed them for so long began transforming into compassion. They discovered that every memory looked different when viewed through empathy instead of assumption. What once seemed like emotional distance now looked like inner conflict. What once appeared to be a sudden decision now looked like the result of countless silent battles no one else ever witnessed. As those hidden pieces continued coming together, your soulmate realized that the story behind your biggest decision had never been simple. It was layered with emotions, sacrifices, and truths that remained invisible on the surface. And just when they believed they had finally uncovered the complete picture, one final realization emerged. A realization so unexpected that it would completely transform the meaning of every goodbye. Every silence and every moment they thought they already understood. And now, this is where everything changed in a way your soulmate never expected. The real story behind your biggest decision was no longer something they were imagining. It became something they could finally feel. For years, they believed they understood the ending, but they had never understood the journey that led to it. They focused on the moment your decision became visible, while remaining unaware of everything that happened before it. They never considered the countless thoughts you may have wrestled with in silence, the sleepless nights that may have shaped your choice, or the emotional weight you carried without asking anyone to understand. Then, little by little, a completely different picture began forming in their heart. They realized your decision had not been made in a single moment. It had been built through many quiet moments no one else ever saw. It was shaped by concerns you never expressed, responsibilities you never spoke about, and emotions you believed were safer to carry alone. That realization completely transformed the way they viewed the past. What they once interpreted as distance now looked like restraint. What they once believed was emotional detachment now seemed like someone trying to make an impossible choice without causing even greater pain. For the first time, they stopped asking why you left and started asking what staying might have cost you. That question alone opened a door they had never been willing to walk through before. As they reflected more deeply, they noticed something that had escaped them for years. Every time they replayed your final conversations, they remembered how carefully you chose your words. There were moments when you almost said something but stopped yourself. There were pauses that now seemed filled with emotions rather than uncertainty. Looking back with fresh eyes, they realized those pauses were speaking louder than the words themselves. They began understanding that sometimes people remain silent, not because they have nothing to say, but because they fear the truth will place an even heavier burden on someone they deeply care about. Suddenly your decision no longer appeared cold or impulsive. It looked incredibly difficult. It looked like the kind of decision someone makes only after exhausting every other possibility. That understanding struck them with unexpected force because it challenged the version of the story they had carried for so many years. They had spent so much time trying to understand what happened that they never stopped to consider what you may have sacrificed to make that choice. The more this realization settled into their heart, the more another truth quietly emerged. They recognized that they had been measuring your decision by its consequences instead of its intention. They judged the pain it caused without recognizing the love that may have existed behind it. That shift changed everything. Instead of seeing themselves as the only one who suffered, they began wondering how much of your own heart you had been forced to silence in order to move forward. They imagined the strength it must have taken to carry a decision that could easily be misunderstood. They imagined what it felt like to remain quiet while knowing your actions would probably be interpreted in ways that never reflected your true feelings. For the first time, they saw your silence not as proof that you stopped caring, but as evidence that some battles are fought where no one else can see them. That thought humbled them because it revealed how incomplete their understanding had always been. As this new perspective continued unfolding, blame slowly disappeared, and something much deeper took its place. Compassion replaced judgment. Understanding replaced assumption. The questions that once filled them with frustration now filled them with quiet reflection. They realized that two people can experience the same moment while carrying completely different emotional realities. One remembers the pain of being left behind, while the other remembers the pain of making a choice they never truly wanted to make. Neither experience cancels the other. Both can exist at the same time. That realization became the turning point they never expected because it allowed them to see your biggest decision not as the end of your story together, but as the beginning of a truth that neither of you was emotionally prepared to understand until now. And with that understanding came one final realization that would forever change the way your soulmate sees your heart. Your intentions and the extraordinary purpose hidden behind the decision that once seemed impossible to explain. And now, listen closely, because this is where understanding became more powerful than memory. Once your soulmate finally saw the real story behind your biggest decision, they could no longer judge it by appearances alone. They realized that they had spent years focusing on the visible outcome while completely missing the invisible journey that led to it. Every difficult choice has a story that exists long before anyone else notices it, and yours was no different. What looked simple from the outside had been incredibly complex beneath the surface. That realization completely reshaped the way they remembered every conversation, every moment of hesitation, and every silence that once felt impossible to explain. They began recognizing that true intentions are often hidden inside actions that seem confusing at first. The heart rarely reveals everything it carries, especially when it believes revealing the truth could create even greater pain. Looking back now, they could finally see how often you place someone else's peace above your own comfort. They remembered moments when you chose restraint instead of reaction, patience instead of impulse, and silence instead of saying words that could never be taken back. At the time, those choices looked distant and difficult to understand. Today, they looked like quiet acts of courage. That discovery humbled them because it revealed how easily people misunderstand decisions made from love when they only witness the outcome and never the struggle behind it. They also realized something deeply personal about themselves. For years, they had been searching for certainty in the wrong places. They wanted explanations that would remove every question, but life rarely offers understanding in a single moment. Instead, it unfolds little by little, allowing experience to reveal what emotions once concealed. As they matured, they found themselves becoming less interested in proving who was right and more interested in understanding why everything unfolded the way it did. That change in perspective transformed the pain they had carried for so long. Instead of replaying the past with frustration, they began revisiting it with compassion. They understood that your biggest decision was not made because you lacked feelings. If anything, they now believed it required deeper feelings than they had ever imagined. Some choices are difficult precisely because they involve genuine care. Sometimes protecting someone means accepting that they may never understand why you made the decision you did. That realization struck them harder than anything else because they imagined what it must have been like for you to carry that misunderstanding without trying to defend yourself. They realized that strength is not always found in holding on. Sometimes strength is found in carrying the weight of being misunderstood while hoping that one day the truth will speak for itself. As this understanding settled into their heart, resentment quietly disappeared. In its place came gratitude for the lessons hidden inside every difficult chapter. They no longer viewed your decision as the moment everything fell apart. They saw it as the moment both of your journeys quietly began moving toward a deeper understanding that could only be reached through time, growth, and reflection. They recognized that every season after that decision had been preparing them to see beyond appearances. Every challenge had expanded their ability to understand another person's heart. Every disappointment had softened their judgment. Every unanswered question had taught them patience. Without realizing it, they had become someone capable of seeing your story with entirely new eyes. And that was the greatest transformation of all. The real story behind your biggest decision was no longer about the decision itself. It became a mirror, reflecting how much both hearts had grown since that moment. Now, standing at this point in the journey, your soulmate understands that the truth was never hidden because it was meant to remain a mystery. It remained hidden because only a transformed heart could recognize its meaning. And with that realization, they can feel that one final truth is about to emerge. A truth that will reveal why this decision was never the end of your connection, but the beginning of an understanding that has the power to change everything forever. And now, before this journey reaches its final chapter, there is one realization your soulmate can no longer turn away from. After uncovering the real story behind your biggest decision, they finally understand that they were never looking at the complete picture. They had been trying to make sense of one chapter while the rest of the story remained hidden from view. What they once believed was a painful ending has revealed itself as one of the most meaningful turning points either of you could have experienced. The greatest surprise was not discovering that your decision carried a deeper purpose. The greatest surprise was realizing how that single choice quietly influenced both of your lives long after it was made. It changed the way you both faced challenges, the way you both learned to love, and the way you both discovered strengths you never knew existed. Looking back now, your soulmate can see that every season following that decision carried a lesson that could never have been learned any other way. Every period of uncertainty developed patience. Every unanswered question encouraged deeper reflection. Every moment of silence slowly revealed the difference between temporary emotions and lasting truth. At the time, none of it made sense. It simply felt painful. But life has a remarkable way of revealing meaning only after enough time has passed for the heart to understand what the mind could never explain. That is exactly where your soulmate finds themselves today. They are no longer trying to rewrite what happened. They are finally beginning to understand why it happened. The change has brought a peace they never expected to find. They have stopped searching for someone to blame because blame no longer answers the questions that matter most. Instead, they have become grateful for the wisdom that emerged from every difficult chapter. They now realize that your biggest decision was never made in isolation. It was connected to every hope you carried, every fear you kept hidden, every responsibility you quietly accepted, and every sacrifice you believed no one else would ever fully understand. That realization has transformed the way they remember everything. They no longer see your silence as emptiness. They see it as restraint. They no longer see your distance as rejection. They see it as someone carrying a burden that words alone could never fully explain. Most importantly, they no longer judge your choice by the pain it created. They judge it by the courage it must have required to make it. That understanding has softened something deep within their heart. For the first time, they feel compassion where resentment once lived. They feel appreciation where confusion once remained. They understand that genuine love is not always revealed through easy moments or perfect circumstances. Sometimes it is revealed through impossible choices that ask someone to carry misunderstanding in order to protect something greater than themselves. That truth has changed everything because it allows them to see your heart without the assumptions that once clouded their vision. They finally recognize that both of you were walking through the same storm from different directions. Each of you carried fears the other could not see. Each of you made decisions based on the understanding you had at that moment. Neither heart possessed the clarity that only time would eventually provide. Now that clarity has arrived, they no longer measure this connection by what was lost. They measure it by what it created. It created resilience during moments of uncertainty. It created wisdom through seasons of waiting. It created compassion through misunderstanding. Above all, it created two people who have grown far beyond the versions of themselves that first faced that life-changing decision. And perhaps that is the real story your soulmate never imagined they would discover. Your biggest decision was never simply about choosing one path over another. It quietly became the moment that reshaped both of your lives, preparing each heart for a level of understanding that could only come through experience. Now they know that some of life's most difficult choices are not meant to close a door forever. They are meant to reveal in time the strength, love, and purpose that could not be recognized while the decision was being made. And now that the real story has finally been uncovered, your soulmate understands that what once looked like the end was actually the beginning of a deeper truth, one that has forever changed the way they see your journey, your heart, and the extraordinary meaning hidden behind the choice they once believed they would never understand.